25 games, all single player, all Switch. This is the list for the people who want to disappear into a world for 40 hours, or 400, and come out the other side changed. The original Octopath Traveler was a technical marvel and a structural experiment. 8 protagonists, 8 stories, almost no connection between them. The community loved the HD 2D aesthetic and tolerated the fragmented narrative. Square Enix listened. Octopath Traveler II fixes the design and keeps everything that worked. The crossing stories mechanic finally lets protagonists interact. Certain chapters are built around specific character combinations, and those moments pay off the investment in 8 separate story threads. The day and night system changes which path actions are available and which NPCs populate the world, adding a second pass of content to every location. Oswald's prison break opening is one of the most effective first chapters in JRPG history. Metacritic, 87. The community treated it as the definitive version of what the first game was reaching for. The combat, boosting turn economy, breaking enemy shields, building job combinations across 8 characters, is the turn-based system that every JRPG since has been measured against. On Switch, it's portable at its most lavish. Portable HD, 2D, and handheld mode looks like playing inside a diorama.
It was an honor to have you with me, Raimei.
House Mazed.
We'll raise glasses in celebration.
Monolith Soft had 2 excellent entries in the Xenoblade series before this. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 synthesizes both, mechanically, thematically, and in terms of scale, into something that operates at a tier very few JRPGs reach. The world of Ionios is dying. Soldiers from 2 nations fight a war that neither fully understands, with lifespans of 10 years, harvesting life force from the enemy to sustain their colonies. The premise is bleak. The execution is extraordinary. The 6-character party system, each with a class that can be transferred to other members, and 2 characters that can fuse into a massive Ouroboros form, creates more tactical depth than either predecessor. The field exploration rewards genuine curiosity. The side quests, which in most JRPGs are forgettable, carry emotional weight equivalent to the main chapters. And the ending requires 100 hours of context to land. It lands. Metacritic, 89. Community score consistently higher. The Future Redeemed expansion adds another dimension to the lore that retroactively enriches everything before it. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is the kind of game that makes you mourn finishing it. Acid Nerve made Titan Souls, a boss rush built around one-hit kills, and then made Death's Door. The step up in ambition and execution is total. You play a crow who works for a bureaucracy of death, collecting souls. The tone is dry and funny. The world is melancholic and beautiful. The combat is tight, isometric action that draws from Zelda and Dark Souls in equal measure without fully committing to either. The design economy is exceptional. The world is compact but dense. Every area connects to every other area through shortcuts that you unlock progressively, building a map that feels assembled by hand rather than generated. The weapons have weight. The spells are useful rather than decorative. The bosses require reading patterns and committing to timing. Nothing is wasted. Metacritic, 88. Nintendo Life gave it a 9 out of 10. Cite the Switch port performs cleanly. Death's Door is one of those games that reviewers describe as just long enough. It ends before it asks too much and leaves before you want it to. That restraint is a form of craft that most developers don't practice. Acid Nerve did. Black Salt Games made Dredge in New Zealand, a fishing game built over a Lovecraftian mystery. You manage a fishing boat, sell catch to island communities, upgrade your equipment, and sail waters that behave strangely after dark. The horror is ambient. Something beneath the surface. Something wrong with the fish. Something wrong with your boat's log entries. The fishing mechanics are genuinely engaging. Different species require different techniques and appear in different weather conditions and times of day. The spatial inventory system, fitting catch into a grid, balancing equipment against cargo space, creates a satisfying puzzle layer that other games in the genre skip. The narrative reveals itself slowly through item descriptions, NPC dialogue, and environmental detail. Metacritic, 84. Player reception warmer. The Pale Reach DLC added a frozen biome and deepened the central mystery. Dredge is the rare game that earns its horror through what it implies rather than what it shows. The ending is quiet and devastating. Single player in the most complete sense. This is a game that works specifically because you experience it alone. The original Red Dead Redemption arrived on Switch in 2023. 17 years after Rockstar Games built one of the definitive open-world narratives in the medium. John Marston's story, the dying gunslinger forced by the government to hunt down his former gang, is still the finest thing Rockstar has produced, including its sequel. The Switch port, developed by Double 11, runs the full game including Undead Nightmare. The writing is the anchor. Every character in Marston's world has a perspective shaped by the frontier's collapse. The conversations you have while riding, the strangers you encounter on the road, the way the land itself feels like a character. The attention to environmental and human detail was unprecedented in 2010 and remains exceptional. The game argues that civilization destroys the people who made it necessary. It makes that argument through gameplay, not cutscenes. The Switch port took criticism for resolution. That criticism is technically valid and contextually irrelevant. Red Dead Redemption is a narrative achievement that transcends its technical vessel. Playing it portably for the first time for any generation who missed it is reason enough for the port to exist.
Could you just wait a sec here, would you please? I'm going to wander down that...
Capcom's 2023 remake of Resident Evil 4 took one of the most beloved action games ever made and rebuilt it without losing the thing that made the original work. The tension between resource management, enemy aggression, and the satisfaction of finding the optimal approach to a room full of Ganados. The original 2005 game redefined third-person action. The remake understood why it worked. Leon Kennedy's physicality is completely re-engineered. Parrying, the knife's combat role, the stealth options that weren't in the original. All of it adds to the toolkit without replacing what existed. Ashley's sections, which the original handled clumsily, are redesigned with care. The merchant returns, intact. The atmosphere, rural Spain, castle architecture, industrial island, is richer than the original's hardware could manage. Metacritic, 93. Game of the Year conversations in 2023. The Switch port had to make concessions, but delivers the full experience. One of the few remakes in gaming history that improves on the source without making the source feel obsolete. The original is still good. The remake is extraordinary. CD Projekt Red spent 4 years fixing Cyberpunk 2077 after its disastrous 2020 launch. The version that arrived on Switch in 2025 is not the 2020 game. It is the 2.0 overhaul. Reworked police AI, rebuilt skill trees, overhauled cyberware system, plus the Phantom Liberty expansion, plus every quality of life patch the studio released over half a decade of public development. Night City on a Nintendo Switch should not be possible. It is. The open-world narrative design is still remarkable. V's story is one of the most personal protagonist arcs in the genre, and the way the city populates around that story. The fixers, the side gigs, the random encounters that develop into full character arcs. creates density that most open-world games simulate rather than achieve. Johnny Silverhand is one of the great supporting characters of the decade. The Switch port required significant technical compromise. The community consensus is that the compromise is acceptable. A slightly softer Night City is still Night City. The Phantom Liberty storyline alone, spy thriller, moral complexity, multiple endings, justifies the price. This is the complete version of a game that took 4 years to become itself.
Hacking's the next item on the menu. Might notice I'd...
Mintrocket built Dave the Diver as a side project within Nexon. Not a flagship release, not a calculated genre exercise. An action RPG that is also a restaurant management simulator. Dave dives the blue hole during the day, catching fish and managing sea encounters. He runs a sushi restaurant at night, serving customers and managing staff. The two halves are distinct and interlock completely. The tonal range is extraordinary. Genuinely tense boss encounters give way to comedy cutscenes. A sequence involving a sea folk civilization gives way to a rhythm minigame. A character introduction that should be ridiculous lands emotionally because the writing is disciplined. Dave the Diver does not take itself seriously. That seriousness of not taking itself seriously is total. Metacritic, 90. Indie GOTY candidate in 2023. Remarkable for a game positioned as a side project. The Switch version holds well. The farming expansion added a whole second loop that integrates with both the diving and restaurant systems. Dave the Diver is the most fun you will have this year at a video game sushi restaurant. That sentence is not a qualifier. Unknown Worlds built Subnautica as a survival game where the primary mechanic is curiosity. The planet 4546b is an ocean world. You crashed there. You have a fabricator and a will to live. The game never holds your hand because it understands that discovery is the experience. Finding the first thermal vent, building the first habitat module, descending for the first time into water deep enough that the light goes away. The biome design is the technical achievement. Each depth band has its own visual grammar, fauna, and threat profile. The void, water so deep and dark that navigation instruments stop working, is one of the most effective horror environments in games, and Subnautica never telegraphs what lives there. The narrative reveals itself through voice logs, alien artifacts, and the environment itself. You piece together what happened before you arrived. Metacritic, 87 on PC. The Switch port made concessions that the community documented extensively. The content is entirely intact. Subnautica's power is categorical. The ocean, the darkness, the depth, the sound design. And those things survived the port. This is a game about being alone in something vast. Switch is the right format for that experience. Slowclap studied Pak Mei Kung Fu for Sifu. Not aesthetically, mechanically. The combat system models actual techniques. The Pak Sao deflect, the throat strike, the sweeping low kick, the Pak Mei uppercut sequence. The protagonist ages every time they die and restart from a shrine, moving through 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and into old age. Each decade changing their stats, their health ceiling, and their power. You can finish the game in your 70s if you die enough. That's not failure, that's a different experience. The level design is exceptional. 5 locations, each with its own visual and mechanical identity. A housing project, a club, a museum, a tower, a sanctuary. The environments are traversable in ways the combat uses. Environmental kills, improvised weapons, choke points where enemy positioning becomes tactical. Mastery means clearing rooms faster and taking less damage. The game rewards replaying with increasing understanding. Metacritic, 80. Community rating significantly higher. The Arena's DLC added endless combat scenarios for the mastery-obsessed. Sifu is one of the most elegant games on Switch. Everything extraneous removed. Everything remaining sharpened to the finest possible point. ASCIIsoft made Katana ZERO over 4 years, working from a design philosophy of extreme tonal control. A neo-noir action platformer where every level is a single death loop. You die, you restart, you find the path through. The katana kills everything in one hit. So does everything else. The tension is constant. The dialogue system is unusual. During conversations, you can interrupt NPCs mid-sentence, cutting off lines, choosing responses, sometimes ending conversations violently before they conclude. The story this tells about the protagonist's psychology is more effective than any amount of cutscene exposition. What he refuses to hear tells you more than what he says. The narrative underneath the action, involving a drug called Chronos that enables temporal perception, a therapist of uncertain motives, eyeing a past that reconstructs itself across the game's runtime, is one of the best written stories in the genre. Metacritic, 91. The Switch version is the definitive portable experience of a game designed for intense short sessions. The ending raises questions the sequel will have to answer. The sequel has not arrived. The wait is active. Ubisoft Montpellier made a side-scrolling Prince of Persia, and it turned out to be the best Metroidvania released in 2024. The protagonist is Sargon, a swordsman of time, not a prince, not a legacy character. And the decision to distance the game from franchise baggage allowed the development team to design without constraint. They designed something exceptional. The time powers serve both traversal and combat. Shadow of Simur creates a return point in space that Sargon snaps back to on command, used for puzzle navigation and as a combat repositioning tool simultaneously. The dimensional claw pulls platforms toward you. The mechanics compound on each other in ways that feel discovered rather than designed. The boss fights are some of the most technically demanding in the genre. Metacritic, 87. Were reviewed alongside full-price titles despite launching at $40. The Metroidvania community, a community with high standards given the genre's history, placed it in the top tier of the form. Prince of Persia. The Lost Crown proved that the franchise still had something to say. It also proved Ubisoft Montpellier still had everything. Binary Haze Interactive made Ender Lilies as a first commercial project. The Metroidvania genre has enough entries now that a competent execution no longer stands out. Ender Lilies is not a competent execution. It's a confident, melancholic, mechanically rich game that earns comparison with Hollow Knight. Not because it copies it, but because it arrives at similar quality through different priorities. The protagonist is Lily, a girl who cannot fight but can purify the corrupted knights she defeats, adding them to her roster as weapons and abilities. The possession mechanic means your combat repertoire is tied directly to your exploration progress. Every boss you clear expands your toolkit. The world, a drowned kingdom trapped in rain, is one of the most visually cohesive in the genre. The lore, assembled through item descriptions, is devastating once assembled. Metacritic, 83. Player reception significantly warmer. The OST by Melee is widely considered one of the finest in any game of the decade. Ender Lilies is the Metroidvania you play after Hollow Knight and realize the genre still has space for a different kind of perfect. The Game Kitchen's 2019 Blasphemous was a Metroidvania built around Spanish Catholic iconography pushed to grotesque extremes. Penitents flagellating themselves through a cursed world, miracles twisted into body horror, death rituals made literal. The sequel expands the premise in every dimension. More weapons, more mobility, a more open structure, and an aesthetic that is somehow simultaneously more beautiful and more disturbing. 3 weapon families replace the single sword of the original, each with distinct movesets and upgrade trees. Switching between them mid-combat adds a depth the first game didn't have. The world is larger and more interconnected. The bosses are among the most visually inventive in the genre. The community documented and analyzed every design reference in each one, and finding layers of Spanish religious iconography that most players would miss. Metacritic, 83. The Metroidvania community's reception was warmer. Blasphemous 2 is one of the few sequels that improves the original without making it feel like a rough draft. They feel like companion pieces. The same world with different questions. Neither is complete without the other. Radical Fish Games built CrossCode over 7 years, with a team that spent the first 2 years developing the engine and physics system that makes the game's real-time combat work. The premise, an MMO setting, explored as a single-player action RPG, where the protagonist is amnesiac and literally unable to speak, communicating only through pre-programmed MMO responses. The frame narrative, a player trapped in a game she cannot fully access, is told with more care than most games bother to invest in story at all. The combat is real-time and elemental, with a ball-throwing mechanic that requires physical precision, bouncing shots off walls, hitting enemies from blind angles, timing against moving targets. The puzzle dungeons combine this precision with environmental mechanics that are among the most cleverly designed in any genre. Yet the game is long, 60 to 80 hours for the main campaign, and paced well enough that the length feels earned. Metacritic, 85. The community that found CrossCode described it with the same language they use for genre classics. It arrived without major marketing and built its reputation entirely through word of mouth. Radical Fish Games made something that the industry would have fully supported with a budget 10 times larger. They did it anyway. Devolver Digital and Nevermore, the studio formed by former Thunderful developers, released Neva in 2024. The debut game is a precision action platformer about a warrior named Alba and her wolf companion Neva, who begins the game as a pup and grows across 4 chapters. The emotional core is the relationship. The gameplay design serves it. Combat requires managing distance. Alba's sword has limited range, and Neva's abilities complement the gaps. In early chapters, Neva is supported. In later chapters, she becomes a combat partner with her own attack sequences. The bond progression isn't narrated. It's played. Every mechanical shift in their dynamic is felt before it's understood. Metacritic, 85. GOTY nominations in 2024 from multiple outlets. The art direction, painted, high contrast, and a 4-season structure gives each chapter a completely distinct visual identity. Neva is a short game. Completion in 4 to 6 hours. The length is intentional. It earns its ending without padding it. Some of the most affecting moments in any 2024 release happen in this runtime. Every minute carries weight. Giant Sparrow made 2 games. The first was The Unfinished Swan. The second is What Remains of Edith Finch, which won the BAFTA for Best Game in 2018 and changed the conversation about what narrative games could accomplish. You explore a house full of family deaths, each one told through a different mechanical language. A child's bathtub, a hunting trip, a cannery job, a swing set. The format. Each death a self-contained vignette with its own control scheme and visual grammar prevents any single tragedy from numbing the player to the next. Each one lands differently. The cannery sequence, in which a character's dissociation from repetitive labor is rendered as a gameplay split, is one of the most discussed game design moments of the decade. It communicates something about consciousness that prose cannot. Metacritic. 88. In 2 to 3 hours to complete. The length is not a flaw. It is the design. Every moment in what remains of Edith Finch is necessary, and no moment is wasted. It asks what a life means after it ends. The answers it finds are specific, unexpected, and true.
I ate a lot of things that night.
Kazutoka Kodaka wrote 3 Danganronpa games and then ended the series by interrogating the series itself. Danganronpa 5-3. Killing Harmony begins as a Danganronpa game. 16 ultimate students trapped in an academy, forced into mutual killing by the bear Monokuma, and ends as a meta-commentary on why that premise exists and who it exists for. The final chapter is one of the most divisive in visual novel history. It is also exactly correct. The class trials are the strongest in the series. New mechanics, the lie bullet, which lets you contradict testimony with false evidence, psyche taxi, debate scrum, adds strategic variety to the core rebuttal rhythm without overcrowding it. The characters in V3 are drawn with more depth than either previous entry. Losing them hits harder. Metacritic, 80. Community score higher, yet with heavy split between players who loved the ending and players who felt betrayed by it. The ending is a thesis, not a twist. Understanding the difference between those things determines your reaction. Danganronpa 5-3 is the conclusion of something. It knows it is. It chose not to be comfortable about it.
They call me the ultimate detective, but...
Neverland made the original Rune Factory 4 in 2012 before the studio closed. The game survived the closure, came to Switch in 2020 as Rune Factory 4 Special, and introduced a new generation to what the series does that no other life simulator attempts. Real-time action RPG combat embedded in a farming and relationship simulation, with an actual story arc that has structure, escalation, and narrative payoff. The protagonist is a young noble who falls from an airship, loses their memory, and is mistaken for a royal inspector. The town of Selphia accommodates the misunderstanding. The dual nature of the game, earnest anime romance visual novel on one track, monster-filled dungeon crawling on another, should clash. It doesn't. The tonal balance is its signature. Metacritic, 80. The community that found Rune Factory 4 on 3DS and then again on Switch evangelizes it aggressively. Rune Factory 5 came after and was weaker in almost every respect. The 4th entry remains the purest expression of what the franchise is for. Newcomer Arc, the post-game chapter added for the special edition, adds a 3rd story arc and validates the purchase for anyone who finished the base game.
Yes.
The Trail series has been running since 2004. 11 mainline entries, one of the most interconnected fictional universes in the JRPG genre, and a reputation among its community as the deepest world building in the medium. Trails Through Daybreak is the entry point for new players in 2026. The first chapter of the Calvard arc, set in a republic inspired by Western Europe rather than the series' traditional monarchies. Van Arkride is a Spriggan, a legal gray area fixer who handles cases too complicated for the police and too legitimate for criminals. The character archetype gives Daybreak a different tonal register than previous entries. More noir, more morally ambiguous, less idealistic. The party assembles around this friction. And the combat introduced the revised S-Craft system and the orbment grid refinements that made the already deep tactical layer more flexible. Metacritic, 87. The Trails community, genuinely one of the most dedicated in the JRPG space, treated Daybreak as a series high point. It works as a standalone for newcomers. It rewards lore knowledge for veterans. The sequel, Trails Through Daybreak 2, continues the arc. Starting here means having a reason to keep going. Final Fantasy XII was released in 2006, polarized its audience, and spent 15 years being reassessed upward. The Zodiac Age remaster, one which arrived on Switch, includes the Zodiac job system from the Japanese International Zodiac job system release that the West never received in 2007, effectively adding a character build layer that the original Western release was missing. The complete version of 12 is a different and better game. The Gambit system, programmable AI instructions that automate party behavior according to player-defined conditional logic, was called lazy when it launched, and is now recognized as one of the most inventive design decisions in the franchise's history. You define how your characters behave and then watch a battle system that you built. The optimization is the gameplay. And the political narrative, a continent of nations managing imperial aggression through proxy conflicts, is the most adult story in the numbered Final Fantasy series. Metacritic, 78 on Switch. The community score tells a different story. Consistent 8+ from players who spent time with it. 12 is an acquired taste that rewards patience. The Zodiac Age is the best version of that taste.
But now you've gone and ruined that. Haven't you, Captain?
Capcom released Dragon's Dogma in 2012 and then re-released it with the Bitter Black Isle expansion as Dark Arisen in 2013. The game found its audience slowly. Through word of mouth, through YouTube videos of players discovering emergent moments the developers didn't intend, through a community that described the pawn system in terms that made it sound unlike anything else in the genre. The pawns are AI companions created by the player, given to other players online. Your main pawn travels with other players' worlds, learns information about quests, and returns with that knowledge. The system creates a passive social layer beneath a single-player game. Your character visiting worlds you'll never see. Their pawn visiting yours. And the climbing system, grabbing onto large enemies and attacking specific body parts to bring them down, predates Monster Hunter World's similar approach and remains more physically satisfying. Metacritic, 83. The cult following that formed around Dragon's Dogma is one of the most dedicated in action RPG history. The sequel, Dragon's Dogma II, arrived in 2024 on PC and PlayStation. Dark Arisen on Switch remains the most portable version of the original, and the original is still worth playing. One More Level's 2020 Cyberpunk action game builds its entire design around one rule. One hit kills. You die constantly. You restart instantly. The level is the puzzle. Find the path through the enemy formation, the precise sequence of grapples and wall runs and sword strikes, and execute it without error. The design is hostile in a way that treats mastery as the only acceptable state. The movement system is the best part. Wall running, grappling, sliding, and a dodge ability that creates brief slow motion. All of it chains together at a speed that makes successful runs feel choreographed. The cyberpunk aesthetic is fully committed. A tower city called Dharma with a mega corporation at the top and the dispossessed below, and you're a tool of someone's political agenda who has no memory of being made. Metacritic, 80. The community of players who completed it describes the learning curve as the point. Every death is information. Every successful run is accumulated knowledge expressed as flow. Ghostrunner is brutal, precise, and designed for the specific joy of executing a previously impossible sequence perfectly. The Switch port compromises the frame rate but preserves the feel. Square Enix released Paranormasight in 2023 without significant marketing, and it was immediately recognized by the visual novel community as one of the best games in the genre. Set in 1980s Tokyo, specifically Honjo, a district known for its Seven Wonders folklore. It follows multiple protagonists caught in a ritual involving curses that kill through specific conditions, like dying at the sight of your own footprints. The multiple protagonist structure, which requires switching between characters to understand the full picture, is matched with a fourth wall awareness. The game's menus, its chapter structure, even the way it saves, all of it becomes part of the design in a chapter that redefines what the frame narrative means. The localization by Square Enix's internal team is exceptional. The period dialogue, as the supernatural bureaucracy, the police procedural elements all feel specific and earned. Metacritic, 85. Invisible to most audiences, known intensely to those who found it. Paranormasight is the game that makes people text friends immediately after completing a chapter. It has that quality. The ending is earned. The journey there is inventive in ways that most visual novel writers don't attempt. Binary Haze Interactive's follow-up to Ender Lilies released in 2025 and immediately established itself as the rare sequel that deepens rather than repeats. Where Ender Lilies was a story about a girl purifying corrupted knights in a drowned kingdom, Ender Magnolia is a story about a girl who can repair and communicate with homunculi, artificial beings created to perform labor, in a world that has discarded them as broken. The combat reflects this. Protagonist Lilac commands homunculi with different attack patterns, building combinations mid-combat that require understanding each unit's timing and range. The system is more technically demanding than Ender Lilies and rewards investment more granularly. The world is more interconnected, the shortcuts more thoughtfully placed, the environmental storytelling denser. Metacritic, 87. The Metroidvania community welcomed it as evidence that Binary Haze Interactive had not made a single excellent game by accident. They had a methodology, and the methodology produced consistent quality. Ender Magnolia is the second proof of concept for a studio that is now one of the most important in the genre. The OST, again by Melee, is again remarkable.